Good morning. I want to welcome you to the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Lecture. My name is Lester Mons, and I'm the Senior Vice Provost for Academic Affairs. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the campus the noted pediatric surgeon and Michigan alumnus, Dr. Benjamin Carson. Members of the Carson family are here with us today, and I'd like to recognize them. Will you please stand, please? There you are. Thank you. Over the last 4.5 months, we have experienced one of the most violent periods in our nation's history. The events of September 11th brought to our shores an unprecedented magnitude of violence. Acts of violence against the Arab and Islamic community continue to plague the nation. It is around this holiday that we feel the urgent need to rekindle Dr. King's thoughts on issues of social justice and equality. As a strong proponent of nonviolence, he certainly had much to say about the violent now in our midst. In his book, Stride Toward Freedom, The Montgomery Story, published in 1958, Dr. King addressed the issue of violence, and this is what he said. Violence as a way of achieving justice is both impractical and immoral. It is impractical because it is a descending spiral ending in destruction for all. The old law of an eye for an eye leaves everybody blind. Violence is immoral because it seeks to humiliate the opponent rather than to win his understanding. It seeks to annihilate rather than to convert. Violence is immoral because it thrives on hatred rather than love. It destroys community and makes brotherhood impossible. It leaves society in monologue rather than dialogue. Violence ends by defeating itself. It creates bitterness in the survivors and brutality in the destroyers. Dr. King's words are as applicable today as they were 44 years ago. I want to offer special thanks to those individuals and groups on the campus who worked tirelessly to make this year's commemoration a success, and to those who have offered our special brand of Michigan hospitality to our guests. First, to Provost Paul Courant, who hosted a breakfast this morning for Dr. Carson. We appreciate the support of the deans, executive officers, faculty, staff, and students for their participation in this morning's events. And I'd like to recognize Provost Cantor, sorry. It's a different provost, Provost Courant. Sorry, boss, I'll make that up to you later. The annual Martin Luther King Day Symposium could not take place without the work carried out by many individuals and groups. I'd like to recognize the work of those who played key roles in this year's commemoration, starting with Associate Vice Provost and Director of the Office of Academic Multicultural Initiatives, Dr. John Matlock. And to our new-seated PhD, Dr. Damon Williams, the symposium coordinator. To the Martin Luther King Day Symposium Planning Committee, will those members please stand? Wherever you are. Thank you. And the Office of Academic Multicultural Initiatives staff, those who are here, please stand. And finally, to all of our campus and community groups who work to organize the over 75 events that are spread over the next 4 weeks, we are grateful for their efforts as well. At this time, I would like to introduce our interim president, University of Michigan, Dr. B. Joseph White, who will have some opening remarks. President White.
morning, everybody. Welcome to the University of Michigan's celebration of the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King. A special welcome to our students from the University of Michigan and also students from a number of schools in the Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti area. I want to extend my own very special welcome to Dr. Benjamin Carson. Welcome home, welcome back to Detroit, Ann Arbor, and the University of Michigan. It's great to have you here. You're always welcome here, and thank you for joining us today. I want to add my thanks to Lester Montz, to John Matlock, and all the others who Lester recognized for the wonderful job they've done in organizing today. I don't know about you, but I can't wait to hear Dr. Carson speak, so I'm going to be very brief. There are two things I'd like to say to you. First, I had the pleasure this morning of meeting Harry Williams, president of the Ann Arbor chapter of the NAACP. He asked me a question. Does the University of Michigan remain committed to diversity and defense of affirmative action? And I want to tell all of you what I told him. The answer is yes, of course, absolutely. And I told Mr. Williams there are at least three reasons. Number one, our university and our independence to make judgments about bringing together a great human group for learning is under attack by people who don't share our values, and we need to defend ourselves. Number two, it's the morally right thing to do, and that's reason enough. And number three, we are preparing young people to join the world's most diverse democracy and to participate in the global society and global world. And to prepare them, you, properly, we need to have a diverse group of talented people who can learn from each other while they're here at the University of Michigan. The second thing I want to say, particularly to our students, is that when we see a wonderful program like today, and Dr. Carson said after looking at our materials for Martin Luther King Day, he had never seen anything like the magnitude of the program at the University of Michigan. That made me very happy. The reason we have such a great celebration of the Martin Luther King holiday at the University of Michigan should not be taken for granted. It didn't used to be this way. It was primarily students who over the years pressed the university to embrace this holiday and create a great, rich program and opportunity for learning and enjoyment and celebration for the entire community. From the Black Action Movement in the 1960s and 70s through the United Coalition Against Racism in the 1980s, we owe this day to students who at the time were perceived to be difficult, troublesome, unreasonable. And it's a reminder that a great deal of human progress is made by such people having the conviction and the courage to speak to those in power. We owe them a debt. And I say to you, today's students, that having strong views about matters that are morally important and retaining and developing the capacity for outrage is crucially important. I encourage you to do so. Today, later, wonderful programs across campus. Randall Robinson, formerly head of Trans-Africa at the Business School at 1:30. A wonderful tribute to gospel music here in Hill Auditorium at 8 o'clock tonight. I invite you to join us. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Juanita Merchant, Associate Professor of Internal Medicine and Physiology, who will introduce Dr. Carson. Dr. Merchant?
Thank you, Dr. White. Good morning. It is an honor for me to introduce the speaker for the University of Michigan's 15th Annual Dr. Martin Luther King Symposium Lecture. Dr. Benjamin S. Carson received his BA degree from Yale University and is an alumnus of the University of Michigan Medical School. He is currently Professor of Neurosurgery, Oncology, Plastic Surgery, and Pediatrics at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. Dr. Carson is a world-renowned neurosurgeon and co-directs the Craniofacial Center at Johns Hopkins. In case you are wondering, he has assured me that he will not be speaking on complicated medical procedures involving the brain. For you see, he not only has done outstanding work in the medical profession, but he has also written 3 books designed to motivate people to do their very best in life and to work through their adversities. For indeed, life offers many challenges, and we must meet those challenges, be they good or bad. We learn from both. He was chosen as this year's speaker because he embodies the theme for this year's symposium: honoring, challenging, and living. As many of you are aware from public fora or from reading his biographical sketch in today's program, Dr. Carson has established his reputation for taking on very challenging neurosurgical cases, such as separating Siamese twins fused as the brain. Many of us became aware of Dr. Carson several years ago when he was interviewed by the premier news program 2020. Although already a physician myself, I was quite impressed to see the mainstream news media pay homage to a Black scientist and physician, rather than yet another athlete or singer. It was an inspiration for me to see such talent in an African American recognized. Reading some of the biographical information about Dr. Carson echoed many of the sentiments I have felt as an African American physician scientist. Too often we are discouraged from not only using our brains, but also from being proud of our vast capabilities. Honoring, challenging, and living. Honoring. A recurrent theme in Dr. Carson's life is the honor that he consistently bestows upon his mother, who, despite her third-grade education, insisted that her children receive the best education, and in so doing, would become the best. Challenging. Yes, Dr. Carson overcame extreme poverty and peer pressure, but I suspect that the biggest challenge that Dr. Carson will speak to is how he overcame the demons in his own mind that threatened to limit his success, that of self-doubt. Finally, living. What we learn through our own life will only continue to live and breathe through time if we pass the formula for success on to the next generation. Invest in young minds. Teach them that it is okay to think differently, to excel in biochemistry instead of basketball, Haydn instead of hip-hop. To keep the dream living and breathing, Dr. Carson and his wife created a program known as the Carson Scholars Fund for students up to grade 12 who meet the standards of academic achievement and humanitarian service. I'm sure you are as excited as I am to hear about his journey directly from the source. So to deliver this year's MLK Symposium on honoring, challenging, and living, please join me in welcoming one of the university's distinguished graduates, Dr. Benjamin S. Carson.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, you all certainly make an alumnus feel welcome coming back home, and it's always great to be back here in Ann Arbor, and particularly at the University of Michigan, where so many things happened that defined the rest of my life. I mean, not only did I have a wonderful educational experience, but it was here in Ann Arbor that I got married. Now I've been married for 26 and a half years. It was here that, thank you. It was here that I became Dr. Benjamin Carson. It's here that I made my decision to go into neurosurgery. So, as you can see, Ann Arbor is obviously an extraordinarily important part of my life. But we're here today to talk about the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. You know, I can remember as a young person looking at the television, watching Dr. King leading protesters across the South. I can remember seeing people mowed down by water hoses, being mauled by dogs, beaten, and imprisoned. Students here are too young to remember that, but I remember it very vividly. I can remember as a youngster growing up in Detroit, having my life threatened for being in certain parts of the city that I wasn't supposed to be in. I can remember after I turned things around academically, being an 8th grade student at a white junior high school and having the highest academic achievement. And one of the teachers coming in front of the assembly and chastising the white students for allowing a black student to be number one. You know, all of those things I can remember, and a lot more than that. But you know what Dr. King was all about? It's not about black, white, yellow, or red. He was about people. He was about recognizing people for who they are. His dream was that people would be recognized for the content of their character rather than the color of their skin. And I hope that that's something that when we leave here today will be foremost in our minds. Now, medicine has always been a career that has intrigued me. There was never any other career that I considered. As a young person, I can remember in church hearing the mission stories, and they frequently featured missionary doctors who seemed like the most noble people on the face of the earth, traveling throughout the world at great personal sacrifice to bring not only physical but mental and spiritual healing to people. And I said, there is no more noble thing that a person can do. And that was my dream from the time I was 8 years old until I was 13. At which time, having grown up in dire poverty, I decided I'd rather be rich. So at that point, missionary doctor was out and psychiatrist was in. Now, have you ever noticed on television that psychiatrists seem like rich people? You know, they have these big fancy mansions, drive Jaguars, have these big plush offices, and all they have to do is talk to crazy people all day. And it seemed like I was doing that anyway, so I said, you know, this is going to work out extremely well. So started reading Psychology Today. I was the local shrink at Southwestern High School. People would come to me with their problems, you know. And I majored in psychology in college and did advanced psych when I came here to the University of Michigan, and I was all set. And then I started meeting a bunch of psychiatrists. Need I say more? No, I'm just, no, I'm just kidding. But actually, psychiatrists are some of the more intellectual members of the medical community. But what I discovered is that what they do in real life is not what they do on television. What they do in real life is considerably more important than what they do on television. But it wasn't what I wanted to do. So I made a major switch, and I started saying, well, what are you really, really good at? And you know, this is obviously a good mental exercise for all students to go through. What are you really, really talented at? I believe God gives everybody special gifts and talents. And I started analyzing my life, and I realized I had a lot of eye-hand coordination, the ability to think in 3 dimensions. I was a careful person, never dropped things and said, oops. And I love to dissect things. You know, when I was a kid, if there was a little animal or a bug around, I always knew what was inside. So, you know, I took my interest in the brain and all of those things, and I put them together, and I said, you would be a terrific neurosurgeon. And that's how I came up with the idea. Doesn't mean I wouldn't have been a good lawyer or an engineer or a history professor or a businessman. I'm sure I could have done any of those things as well, but probably would not have excelled to the same degree because I was taking advantage of those special gifts and talents. And that makes an incredible difference. But, you know, I got to tell you that even though, you know, the crush of people applying to medical school has dwindled somewhat because, you know, there aren't as many advantages in medicine as there used to be, I got to tell you that it's just such a wonderful career because you get a chance to make a real difference in the quality of people's lives and in their longevity. You know, that devastated mother who comes in, just found out that their kid has a brain tumor, and you can take it out, and you can go out there, and finally they can hear what you're saying when you say, Mrs. Johnson, the tumor's out, and your child is awake and is asking for you. And that look of relief and that joy on their face. It's a priceless thing to be privileged to play that role in people's lives. But you also get a lot of perspective on life. You know, I operated on a young man last week from South America with a malignant brain tumor. I'd operated on a sibling about 8 years ago who also had a malignant brain tumor. That sibling subsequently died. Can you imagine what those parents are going through right now? Another child with a malignant brain tumor. And you know, when you see things like that, you recognize that you don't have any problems. You know, the little stuff that you've been sitting around sweating about, it's not a problem. You know, medicine is very good for giving you that kind of perspective in life and helping you not to feel sorry for yourself. But one of the things that is a real challenge in medicine now is not just taking care of that brain tumor or that patient with seizures, but coming up with ways to provide good health care for our entire nation. And it's something that I hope many of you young people will devote yourselves to, whether you're going into medicine or government, law, public health. There are things that you can do. What about those 44 million people out there who have no health insurance? What are we going to do about them? Are we just going to forget about them and only talk about them at the time of elections? Or are we going to deal with that problem as a society? You know, first of all, as I mentioned to President Bush this summer, there are no 44 million people who are uninsured. Because you see, every one of them can go into the emergency room, anywhere, and they have to be taken care of. It's illegal not to take care of them. So they get taken care of, but it costs 5 times more to take care of them in the emergency room than it would in a local clinic. Who pays the bill? I do, and you do. We all do. As a society, we pay the bill. So I mentioned to the president that since we're paying the bill anyway, and we're paying premium dollars, why don't we wise up a little bit and say, let's use economic dollars. And let's think about ways that we can take advantage of a system that works. You say, well, what do we do for people who are too poor to eat? We provide food stamps. And I say, why does that program work? Because when people get their monthly allocation of food stamps, they don't go out the first 5 days and buy porterhouse steak and starve the rest of the month. They buy a little hamburger and some hamburger helper and some vegetables, and they make it stretch. And they learn to use it wisely. I said, why couldn't we use the same thing? Electronic medical accounts that are replenished on a monthly basis. And people began to get that ingrained in their mind. And now when they have that diabetic foot ulcer, instead of going to the emergency room and getting it taken care of, they go to the clinic. You see, because in the emergency room, they get patched up and they get sent out. In the clinic, they get patched up, and then someone says, now let's get your diabetes under control so that you're not back here in 3 weeks with another problem. You see, there are a lot of solutions of that nature. The president was actually quite enthusiastic about that before 9/11. You know, we'll have to get back to it, hopefully. But, you know, there are a lot of things that can be done to breathe logic into our system and that make economic sense. That will cost us a lot less money as time goes on. I've also started a new initiative called the Benevolent Endowment Network Fund, which will supplement the people who have not any insurance at all or who are underinsured, so they can be taken care of at premier medical centers like the University of Michigan. And that program is going to be presented to Bill Gates this week, so everybody put that on your prayer list. I hope we're going to be able to do that. But you know, my dream of becoming a doctor kind of had some bumps in the road. When I was 8 years old, my parents got divorced. You know, my mother was one of 24 children, and she got married at age 13. She and my father moved from rural Tennessee to Detroit, where he was working in a factory. She discovered that he was a bigamist, had another family, and I told that story at a commencement at the University of Utah. Nobody thought it was that strange. But, you know, she thought it was pretty strange, as you can imagine. Now, of course, they don't do that in Utah anymore, okay, for the most part. And in fact, if everybody had the morals of the people in Utah, I think we'd be in pretty good shape. But at any rate, we moved from Detroit to Boston to live with her sister and brother-in-law in a typical tenement, boarded up windows and doors, you know, strewn glass all over the street, sirens and gangs, murders. But the thing that impressed me the most were the roaches. They had large, aggressive roaches. Not only would they crawl on the table, but they would crawl in your cereal box. So if you were eating Raisin Bran, you had to know what the brown things were in the box. I shouldn't talk about that now that I'm on the Kellogg board, but it's too much fun. But, and then they had water rats. These things were so big they could move a garbage can by themselves. And you know, while we were there enjoying that environment, my mother was out working 2, sometimes 3 jobs at a time as a domestic. She didn't want to be on welfare. And she felt that if she worked, she could maintain control of her own life. We certainly became very, very familiar with poverty. There was never enough money for anything. Could always plan on hearing those words, to the point where pretty soon we just stopped asking for stuff because you knew there wasn't going to be any money for it. Teacher would sometimes say, I want everybody to bring a nickel to school tomorrow because we're going to have popcorn balls. And that's how much they cost, a nickel. Some people would bring a dime, a quarter, $1, buy a whole bag of them. Do you know I never had a popcorn ball? We didn't have an extra nickel. Could go to the state fair. We only had enough money to get in. Not enough money to buy any cotton candy. Not enough money to ride any of the rides. I used to love the Dodgem cars. I could stand there and watch people in those Dodgem cars for 3 hours driving around like little maniacs. It was just so much fun. Never got a chance to drive one. Some people say that's why I drive the way I do. I don't think so. But, you know, we did have the love. We knew that my mother loved us. She worked extremely hard. And it was for us that she was doing it. And she figured if she worked long enough and hard enough, she could become independent again. And after a couple of years, we did move back to Detroit, still in a multifamily dwelling, still with significant wildlife, but nevertheless, you know, she was independent. I was a 5th grade student. I was perhaps the worst 5th grade student you have ever seen. I didn't think that I was very smart. That was an opinion shared by my classmates and teachers as well. In fact, my nickname was Dummy. And once we were having an argument about who was the dumbest kid in the class. And it wasn't that much of an argument. Everybody concluded that it was me. But then someone tried to extend the argument to who was the dumbest person in the world. And I took exception to that. So we had a rather vigorous argument. Unfortunately, that day we had a math quiz, and I got a 0. Now, that wasn't a problem. I always got a 0. The problem was, on that particular day, the teacher said you had to pass your test to the person behind you, let them correct it, give it back to you. She would call your name out loud, and you had to report your score out loud. Wonderful if you got 100 or 95. Not so good if you got a 0 and just had an argument about who was the dumbest person in the world. So, the teacher didn't believe I needed to go to the bathroom, so I had to figure out what I was going to do, because I knew as soon as I said 0, the kids were going to burst out in laughter and say, "We told you." So I started scheming. I said, I know what I'm going to do. When the teacher calls my name, I'll mumble. And I'll try to make it sound like one thing to the teacher and another thing to the girl behind me. And the teacher will just write it down and move on. So when the teacher called my name, I said, "Nyan." And she said, 9? Oh, Benjamin, you got 9 right. Oh, this is wonderful. I knew you could do it if you just applied yourself. Students, I want you to understand the significance of what has happened. Benjamin has gotten 9 right. And she just ranted and raved for about 5 minutes, and finally the girl behind me just couldn't take it any longer. And she stood up and said, "He said none." And the kids were rolling in the aisles, and the teacher was so embarrassed. And if I could have disappeared into thin air, never to be heard from again in the history of the world, I would gladly have done so, but I couldn't. So I had to sit there and act like it didn't bother me. But it did. It bothered me a lot. Not enough to make me study, but it bothered me a lot. I was still into having a good time, basketball, baseball, football, dodgeball, any kind of ball, throwing rocks at cars, the whole 9 yards, And I didn't know anything. And that was a problem for me then. But you know something? It's still a problem today. And that's what's really a shame. There's so much superficial knowledge abundant in our society. You can find so many young people out there who know plenty of the wrong stuff, but not the right stuff. I have a program at the hospital where I have 800 students at a time come in, and I show them slides of the human brain, and we talk about medicine and medical careers, and then I talk about human potential, and I tell them what I was like when I was their age. And I had a group in, and at the end, I allow them to ask me questions, but sometimes I ask them questions. And I asked the question, how many of you can name for me 5 NBA players? Do you know virtually every hand went up? Basketball players, baseball players, football players, they can name them. Movie stars, rap singers, no problem. I said, who can name for me 5 Nobel Prize winners? Out of 800, 10 hands went up. I said, leave your hands up because I'm going to call on one of you. All the hands went down. Now, that's really a shame. You stop and think about it. Because we live in a society where people can tell you all about the Golden Globe Awards last night. They can tell you about the playoffs. But they can't tell you how to solve a quadratic equation. They can't tell you the capital of Malaysia. They can't tell you the history of the fall of the Roman Empire. What's happened in our society? And some people say it's okay. We're number one. We're the top. But we're not the first nation in the history of the world to be a pinnacle nation. There have been others. Ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, ancient Rome. Number one, no competition. Going to be there forever. Where are they now? What happened? I'll tell you what happened. The same thing happened in each one of them. They became enamored of sports and entertainment and lifestyles of the rich and famous. They lost their moral compass, and they went right down the tubes. And some people say, it can't happen here. But you know what? It's already happening. question is, can we stop it? Can your generation of young people stop it? Can you learn from the past? Or are we inexorably going to follow the path of other pinnacle nations? It's a very serious question that we all need to ponder. Well, fortunately for me, my mother, even though she had only a third-grade education, was very concerned about my lack of academic achievement. My brother was also doing poorly. She didn't know what to do, so she prayed. She asked God to give her wisdom. Now, that's the wonderful thing about God. You don't have to have a PhD to talk to him, just a little bit of faith. And she had that, and she asked him to give her the wisdom. And you know something? He gave it to her, at least in her opinion. My brother and I didn't think it was all that wise. I mean, turning off the TV, what kind of wisdom is that? You know, as far as we were concerned, that was child abuse. But, you know, we could only watch 2 or 3 TV programs during the week, and with all that spare time, she made us read 2 books apiece from the Detroit Public Library and submit to her written book reports, which she couldn't read, but we didn't know that. You know, she always put a little check mark on it and act like, you know. And I was outraged. But, you know, she never dictated to us what we had to read. So we could read anything we wanted to read. And I loved animals. So I started reading about animals. I read every animal book in the Detroit Public Library. And then I went to plants, and then I went to rocks, because we lived near the railroad tracks. And what is there along the railroad tracks? Rocks, of course. So I would collect my little boxes of rocks, bring them home, get my geology book out from the library. Pretty soon, I could name virtually any rock, tell you where it came from, how it was formed. Still in the 5th grade, still the dummy. And one day, the 5th grade science teacher, Mr. Jake, walked in, and he held up a big, black, shiny rock. He says, "Can anybody tell me what this is?" Well, bear in mind, I never raised my hand. I never answered any questions. So I just waited for one of the smart kids to raise their hand. None of them did. I waited for one of the dumb kids to raise their hand. None of them did. And I said, "This is my big chance," and up went my hand, and everybody turned around. They said, "Benny's got his hand up. Oh, this is going to be good." Oh, they were ready. And the teacher was so amazed, and he said, "Benjamin?" I said, "Mr. Jake?" I said, "That's obsidian." And there was silence in the room because it sounded good. Nobody knew whether it was right or wrong. They didn't know whether they should be impressed or whether they should be laughing. And finally, Mr. Jake broke the silence. He said, "That's right. It is obsidian." And I said, "Obsidian is formed after volcanic eruption, and the lava flows down and hits the water. There's a supercooling process. The elements coalesce. The surface goes there." They were all staring at me, you know. They couldn't believe all this geological information spewing forth from the mouth of the dummy. But I was more amazed than anybody in there, because it dawned on me in that moment that I was no dummy. I said, "Carson, the reason you knew those answers is because you were reading the books." I said, "What if you read books about all your subjects?" Can you imagine the effect? And you know, I tried to act like I didn't care, but I really did care about being called a dummy. And I said, you know, the ideal of reading really resonated with me to the point that no book was safe in my grasp. I read everything I could get my hands on. If I had 5 minutes, I was reading a book. Waiting for the bus, reading a book. On the bus, reading a book. In the bathroom, reading a book. My mother would say, "Benjamin, put the book down and eat your food." It didn't matter. I was always reading. And you know, within the space of a year and a half, I went from the bottom of the class to the top of the class, much to the consternation of all those students who used to call me dummy. The same ones would come to me now and say, "Hey, Benny, how do you work this problem?" And I'd say, "Sit at my feet, youngster, while I instruct you." I was perhaps a little obnoxious. Yeah. But, you know, I kind of went overboard at that point. I got to the point where if I got a 99 on a test and somebody else got 100, I was devastated. I mean, I just could not live with myself until the next test when I could get a higher mark than they did. And I remember I was in the 9th grade, and I went up to one of my classmates. I said, "Dennis, why do you hate me so much?" And he looked me dead in the eye, and he said, "It's because you're so obnoxious." And I said, "Obnoxious? Moi?" He says, you always have to have the highest mark in everything. It was like somebody had stabbed me in the heart with a knife, because I knew he was right on. And I came to the conclusion after some soul searching that I really didn't have to compare myself with anybody else. All I needed to do was the best that I could do and not really worry about what anybody else was doing. And you know, that lifted a gigantic burden from my shoulders. And I'm sure there are some people here who suffer from that syndrome. And you can really make your life a lot better if you stop worrying about what other people are doing and just worry about what you're doing. It makes all the difference in the world. And you know, you think about these brains that we have, these tremendous brains. The thing that distinguishes us from all the other creatures, our brains, capable of remembering everything that you have ever seen, everything you've ever heard. I could take the oldest person in here and bring them up on this stage and implant some depth electrodes and stimulate, and they'd be able to quote back to me verbatim an article that they had read 60 years ago. Your brain retains all of that. It can process more than 2 million bits of information per second. Your brain invented the computer, not vice versa. And you know, when you start thinking about what you can't do, start thinking about those things. Let me ask you a question. How many of you remember your birthday? Let me see your hand. Okay, excellent. Now, what did your brain have to do for you to respond to that question? Just to give you an idea of how sophisticated your brain is. Well, first of all, the sound waves had to leave my lips, travel through the air, enter your external auditory meatus, travel down to your tympanic membrane, set up a vibratory forces, travel across the ossicles of the middle ear to the oval and warm window, setting up a vibratory force in the endolin, which mechanically distorted the microcilia, converting mechanical energy to electrical energy, which traveled across the cochlear nerve to the cochlear nucleus at the pontomedullary junction, from there to the superior olivary nucleus, descending bilaterally up the brainstem to the laminiskis, to the inferior colliculus, and the medial geniculate nuclei, across the thalamic radiations to the and on and on and on. I mean, that is the simplified version of what your brain had to do. I didn't want to get into the complexities of we've been here all day. My apologies to the young lady here. But, she's doing a great job, isn't she? You know, I'd love to see that. I'd love to see that. You know? But you know, with those sophisticated brains of ours, we should be able to do virtually anything. Because the brain is what makes us who we are. It's not the color of our skin. You know, I operate on people from every part of this earth. And I'm going to tell you something. When I open that scalp and I take that skull off, and I'm looking at that brain, I can't tell where they came from. I can't tell whether they came from China or Africa or New Jersey. Well, maybe New Jersey. But no, seriously, I mean, you cannot tell because it's all the same. And we need to start thinking about that. But you know, there's one segment of our society that is particularly affected, particularly excluded. American society, and that's a young black male. Many of you have heard it said that the young black male in America is an endangered species. Why do people say that? Because there are more young black males in jail than there are in college. Because the homicide rates for young black males are astronomical in our major cities. And some people say, well, I'm not a young black male. Don't know any young black male. It's not my problem. I beg to differ. If you live in this society, it is your problem. Because even though all of our ancestors may have come to this country in different boats, we're all in the same boat now. And if part of the boat sinks, eventually the rest of it goes down too. Remember that movie, The Titanic? Once that boat started going down, you could go to the penthouse suite, but you're still going down. And we need to understand that as a society, that we're all in this thing together. Now, what happened to those young black males? Anybody in the field of education knows that kindergarten, first grade, second grade, they're excellent students, just like anybody else. And then they start getting into the 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. That peer pressure begins to have a much greater effect. And then they start taking American history, and they read about this great nation of ours in that American history book. And this is a great nation. If you don't believe me, you go live somewhere else for a little while. You'll be back. But the fact of the matter is, as they're reading that book, they notice that there's not anybody who looked like them who really contributed in any major way to the development of this nation. They say, well, where do I fit in? Maybe next year I'll find out when I take world history. Next year they take world history, the same thing happens. Where do I fit in? Everybody always wants to know that. And then they come home and they turn the TV on. Oh, there I am. Playing basketball, baseball, football, rapping in those baggy pants, acting a fool on some sit comedy. You develop a certain mindset about what success for you means. That mindset does not include being an economics professor at the University of Michigan or a nuclear physicist. And you start thinking, that's where I'm going to be. I'm going to be a sports star or an entertainer. The media forgets to tell you what the statistics are. And by the time you realize what they are, it's too late. You've already neglected your studies. What's left? Along comes this big black BMW with tinted glass. Out steps this tall guy with jewels and furs and women. Want to be like me? I can show you how to get all this stuff. Besides that, that society of yours sold you a bill of goods. They owe you. I'm going to show you how to get what you deserve. The next thing you know, you're looking at the 6 o'clock news. You're saying, isn't that little Johnny? He was such a good boy. Being led away with cuffs, trying to hide his face. What happened? It didn't have to happen. Never had to happen. Because anybody in this room could have taken that young man when he was 6 years old by the hand and walked down the streets of Ann Arbor and given him a black history lesson that he would have never forgotten. It doesn't matter what your ethnic background is. You could have taken him by the hand and you could have pointed to your shoes and you could have said it was Jan Matzliger, a black man who invented the automatic shoe lasting machine, which revolutionized the shoe industry throughout the world. And you'll step into that clean street on State Street and you'll say, it was Charles Brooks, a black man who invented the street sweeper, those machines with the big brushes that clean the streets. And down that street comes one of those big refrigerated tractor trailer trucks. You can tell them it was Frederick Jones, a black man who invented the refrigeration system for trucks, later adopted for airplanes, boats, and trains. And it comes to a stop at the red light. You tell them it was Garrett Morgan, a black man who invented the traffic signal. And while you're talking about Garrett Morgan, you can tell how he invented the gas mask, saved lots of lives during the war. And while you're talking about the war, Henrietta Bradbury, a black woman who invented the underwater cannon, made it possible to launch torpedoes from submarines. And you'll see this beautiful black woman walking down the street. A black man did not invent her, but you can use this opportunity to talk about Madam C.J. Walker, a black woman who invented cosmetic products for women of dark complexion, was the first woman of any nationality in the United States to become a millionaire on her own efforts. And then you'll walk past the hospital and you can talk about the contributions of Charles Drew to blood banking and understanding of the function of blood plasma. Daniel Hale Williams, the first successful open heart surgery in the world, had an operative mortality rate of only 1.5%, better than many cardiothoracic surgeons today. You look up at the surgical light, Thomas Edison. You didn't know he was black, did you? Well, actually, he wasn't. But his right-hand man, Lewis Latimer, was. And you can talk about how Lewis Latimer came up with the filament that made the light bulb work for more than 3 days, how Lewis Latimer did pioneering work in incandescent and fluorescent lighting, how Lewis Latimer diagrammed the telephone for Alexander Graham Bell, was a tremendous inventor in his own right. Most people have never even heard of him. You walk by the railroad tracks, Andrew Beard, the automatic railroad car coupler, which spurred on the Industrial Revolution. Elijah McCoy, automatic lubrication system for locomotive engines, changed the way that locomotive trains went. In fact, Elijah McCoy had so many great inventions, when something new would come out, people would say, is that a McCoy? Is that the real McCoy? That's where the term came from. You got racist people like David Duke talking about the real McCoy, don't even know who they're paying homage to. And And I'm just barely scratching the surface. So you see, that young man never had any reason to believe that he or his ancestors don't belong in this country and have not played an important role in the development of this country. But you know what's even more important? I can take that same walk down the street for virtually any ethnic group in this nation, and I can point out tremendous contributions that were made by them, by Hispanics, by Germans, by Italians, by Irish, English, Russians, anybody. You see, that's how the United States of America became number one faster than any other nation in the history of the world, because we had so many people with so much talent. Our diversity is not a problem, it's a strength. And we have to have the intellectual ability and fortitude to recognize it as such. How many of you would want to go to the National Aquarium if every fish in there was a goldfish? Pay good money to get in there. It wouldn't be that interesting. Who would go to the National Zoo if every animal was a Thompson's gazelle? It'd be pretty boring. Who would want a bouquet of flowers if everyone was identical? Who would want to get up in the morning if everybody looked exactly like you? In some cases, that will be a national disaster. So we should be extraordinarily pleased that God has given us diversity. It is not a problem. It is a wonderful, wonderful thing. You know, thank you. One of the things that has dawned upon me over the years as an academic neurosurgeon is that, yes, it's wonderful to be a professor of neurosurgery at a prestigious university. But that's not what it's all about. What's vastly more important than that is using those talents and using the platform that it affords you to positively affect the lives of others. You see, I think that's what Dr. King would have been most interested in. Dr. King would not have been interested in all the honorary degrees that he had, or any material goods, or even the Nobel Prize. He would have been interested in whether the life that he led made the lives of other people better. That's what we all need to be thinking about. One of the things that my wife and I noticed a number of years ago and going into high schools is that there are all these trophies. All-state basketball, all-state wrestling, all-state football, all-state this, all-state that. But what did the kids who were academic superstars get? A pat on the head and a National Honor Society pin. A lot of the other kids thought they were nerds and Poindexters and all kinds of things. Nobody really admired them like they did the quarterback. And I said, we have to do something about this. Because where is it going to lead our society? What will keep us on top? The ability to shoot a 25-foot jump shot? Or the ability to solve an algebraic equation? Don't have to be very smart to figure out the answer to that. So we started a scholarship program in which we would give $1,000 to students starting in the 4th grade, all the way to the 12th grade, for superior academic achievement and the demonstration of humanitarian qualities. Because, see, we didn't just want people who were smart. I mean, Hitler was smart. Marquis de Sade was smart, but they didn't do good things. So we had to have people who were both smart and demonstrate those qualities. We would give them $1,000. It gets put into a trust fund developed by our financial people. And then when they go to college, the money and interest they get. In addition to that, the school gets a big trophy, every bit as impressive as any sports trophy you've ever seen. They get a medal, they get to go to a banquet, they get local press attention, and they become somebody who is worth emulating for the other students. We now have over 600 of those scholars. In fact, there's a young lady right here in this auditorium who is one of the Carson scholars, Candace Turner. Some of you probably know her. And I will tell you, it is not easy to get one of those things, but it's not really the students who win the scholarship that we're concerned about. It's the other students. It's the peripheral effect. When people begin to see that maybe it's not so bad to be smart. Many teachers have told us the grade point averages in their class have gone up a whole point over the ensuing year. And it is our goal to take that program across the entire nation and help our young people to recognize that it's okay to be smart and it's okay to be nice, because we're really all in this thing together. This country belongs to all of us. And what a wonderful place it can be when we stop being enemies and when we start being friends. You know, one of the good fallouts, I think, from 9/11 was that people began to actually look at each other. And people began to actually talk to each other. And you know, when you look at a person and you talk to them and you get to know them, most of the times you'll find out that they're not really bad people. And you know, another thing that you will discover, and I'm sure many of you have already, is when you get to know a person, all of a sudden you don't think of them as African American. You don't think of them as Irish American, Native American, or what have you. You think of them as John, or Barbara, Susan, or Juan, don't you? And that's what we need to get back to. Now, why are we so interested in dividing ourselves up into all these little groups? You know, I don't know of any other country that does that. I'm an Italian American. I'm an African American. I'm a Japanese American. I'm a this American. I'm a that American. Why do we do that? I got a good idea, though. Send everybody back to that prefix America place and let them live there. Guess where they're going to want to be in 3 weeks? Because they will discover very quickly that they have a lot more in common with everybody here than they do in any of those other places. You know, this is our country. This is our country. There's nothing wrong with it. And everybody in the world is trying to emulate it. We need to be proud of who we are. Well, there were many other experiences that I intended to talk about, but my time is rapidly fleeting. I'm not going to be able to get into them. But I do want to touch on something else that Dr. King talked about, and it was how you related to difficulties and hardships. You know, I remember as an intern at Johns Hopkins, there were not very many black doctors who had ever been through that place. So when I would go on the wards with my scrubs on, invariably one of the nurses would say, "I'm sorry, but Mr. Jones isn't ready to be taken to the OR yet," assuming that I was an orderly. Now, I would say, "Well, gee, I'm sorry he's not ready, but I'm Dr. Carson, neurosurgery service," and they would turn about 18 shades of red, and I would say, "It's all right, you didn't know," and I was very kind to them, and do you know, they would do anything for me. I mean, I just had carte blanche because I didn't react in a negative way. Why did I not react in a negative way? Because I analyzed the situation, and I realized from their perspective, every black man they had ever seen come on the wards in scrubs was an orderly coming to pick up somebody. So why should they think something different? And you see, a lot of times people interpret things as racism or as hatred or malignancy when it isn't, when it's just inexperience or ignorance. That's what tolerance is all about. Learning to put yourself in somebody else's place. And that's something that we all have to learn. We have to be out for each other. We have to be interested in each other. You know, next month is Black History Month. I got to tell you something. This may shock you. I don't like Black History Month. You know why? Because I think every month should be Black History Month. And every month should be White History Month. And every month should be Red History Month and Yellow History Month and Brown History Month. We all need to be interested in each other because that's how you create community and that's how you create family. And I love the movie Independence Day for one reason. Because when those aliens started coming down and attacking the earth, did you notice how all of a sudden the Israelis and the Palestinians were friends? And the Catholics and the Protestants were friends. And you know, everybody's friends because all of a sudden they had perspective on what was really dangerous. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could develop that without an outside threat? Well, fortunately, I had a very rapid career. Things came into the right perspective for me quickly. I found myself chief of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins at age of 33. People would come from all over to see Dr. Ben Carson, chief of pediatric neurosurgery. I would walk in the room and they would say, "When is Dr. Carson coming?" You know, because they expected to see something different. And I would say, "Well, I'm Dr. Carson," and some people would just about have a seizure, which is how I got interested in seizure surgery. But that's not how I got interested. But you know, it was interesting to see people's reactions. But I tell you what was really kind of funny to me. Some of the people who would come in were obviously, you know, from, you know, West Virginia redneck type people, and you could see the wheels churning, and there's, this guy is young, he's black, and he's chief of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins. Boy, he must be really good, you know. And then some of the black patients would come in, and you could see the wheels turning. This guy's young, black. I ain't letting no affirmative action operate on my brain. Yeah. You know, all of us make judgments that we should not be making based on people's external appearance. And we all need to get away from that. But I want to close by talking about what is success. Big houses and cars and bank accounts, and degrees and titles? I think not. I can best describe it, I think, by telling you about what happened in 1997 when I was asked to come to South Africa to head up a team in an attempt to separate type 2 vertical craniopagus twins. Siamese twins joined at the top of the head facing in opposite directions. There have been 13 attempts to separate twins of that nature before, none of which had been successful. So I knew that this was going to be a great medical challenge. I was ready for that. But there was another aspect. You see, this operation was going to be done at the Medical University of South Africa at Medunsa, the only major black teaching hospital in South Africa, always the stepchild throughout the apartheid and post-apartheid period. By doing the operation there, this was going to be their opportunity to stand shoulder to shoulder with Cape Town and Johannesburg and all the other great medical universities. I wasn't ready for that kind of social pressure. I didn't want that on my shoulders. I said, "Lord, you got to help me here. You got to show me something that no one has ever seen before, because you see, smarter and more capable people than me have tried and have failed. What am I going to do here?" And as I was looking at the various radiographs, I noticed that the common drainage system that the twins shared for their brain was a little narrower right in the middle than it was on either end. Now, the traditional neurosurgical literature says you should decide which twin to give the drainage system to, and then separate the other one from that one over the course of 3 or 4 operations, separated by several weeks or months. Well, I felt strongly impressed that we should just divide it using the focal point as the neural area give them both an immediate drainage system that the blood flow would adequately adjust. And when I explained that to the team, they said, "You're the boss. We'll do whatever you want to do." And I remember going to the operating room. It was 2 days before New Year's of '98. There was a big sign over the operating room that said, "God bless Joseph and Luca Banda." And they were having song service and prayer service in the operating room, and I was thrilled. And I said, "Bring a stereo system in so we can play inspirational music." 19 hours into the operation, we were only 3/4 of the way finished. And the part that remained was so complex, the blood vessels were adhesed, entangled, thinned out, and engorged. And we stopped the operation and we went into conference. I thought back on the first set of Siamese twins I operated on. 60 units of blood, the second set 80 units. And as I thought on these, I said, there is not enough blood in South Africa. And I suggested that maybe we could cover over the area that was still connected with skin, come back in several months, give them enough time to develop collateral circulation so that we could cut through that area and they would survive. And the doctors from Zambia, which is where the twins were from, in South Africa, said, "That's a wonderful idea. And I know you could do that at Johns Hopkins. But we don't have the ability to keep partially separated twins alive. They'll die." Now I really felt the weight of the world on my shoulders as I went back in there. I didn't have all my sophisticated equipment. I had my scalpel, my loops, and a prayer on my lips. I said, "Lord, it's up to you." So I went back in there and started cutting between those vessels that were less in thickness than a sheet of paper. You could see the blood coursing through them, just daring you to make a nick. Make a long story short, when I finished that operation, made the final cut between those vessels, over the stereo system came the Hallelujah chorus. Everybody had goosebumps. And when we finished that operation after 28 hours, one of those twins popped his little eyes open and reached up for the tube. The other one did the same thing. By the time we got to the intensive care unit, within 2 days they were extubated. Within 3 days they were eating. Within 2 weeks they were crawling around. And today they're in preschool, perfectly normal. But, thank you. As dramatic as that wasn't the success. The success you had to be there to understand was the reaction of the people who had been following this story in the papers, on the radio, on television. They were ecstatic. Their level of self-esteem was through the roof. They were literally dancing in the streets. We could not walk through the corridors. They were so excited. And you see, that's what real success is all about. It's taking the talent that God has given you and using that to elevate other people. And I think Dr. King would resonate with that. And that's what I mean when I say think big. The T is for talent, which God gave to every single person, not just the ability to sing and dance and throw a ball. Nothing wrong with those things, don't get me wrong. But intellectual talent, we need to recognize and reward that. Make it something special for our young people. The H is for honesty. Lead a clean and honest life. And you don't have to worry about skeletons coming out of the closet. Because if you put them there, they will come back. And you know, if you always tell the truth, you don't have to try to remember what you said 3 months ago. And it makes life so much easier. The I is for insight, which comes from listening to people who've already gone where you're trying to go. Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, said, wise is the person who can learn from someone else's triumphs and mistakes. He said, the person who cannot is a fool. The N is for nice. Be nice to people. Because once they get over their suspicion of why you're being nice, they'll be nice to you. And you can get so much more done that way. And you know what? I want us here at the University of Michigan today to take the niceness pledge. Can we all raise our hands and take the niceness pledge? Okay. This means we're going to be nice to everybody we encounter for 1 week. Okay? Everybody you encounter for a week. Okay? That includes your family too. Now, what have you agreed to do? I'll tell you what you agreed to do. You have agreed not to talk about anybody behind their back for a week, okay? Now, that's going to hurt some people. I understand that, okay? You're not going to talk about anybody in front of their back for a week. You see somebody struggling with something, you're going to help them. Men, it means we're going to bring chivalry back for a week. You're going to open the door for the ladies, hold their chairs for them, okay? Ladies, you're not going to curse them out when they do that, okay? Just for a week. One spot on the elevator, you're going to let somebody else get on it. And when you get on the elevator, you're not going to act like you never saw the numbers change before. Say hello to people. Talk to people that you haven't talked to before. You're going back to get in your car. It's a crowded parking lot. There are no more spaces. You see 3 people following you in their car because they want your space. When you get in the car, you're not going to pull down the mirror and open the glove box. Just get out of the space and let them have it, okay? Just for a week. What a difference it makes. Because it makes you start thinking about other people. And when you think about other people, it does something for you. It increases your endorphin level. It makes you feel better. And you know what? You won't go back. It changes the whole way that you approach things. The K is for knowledge, which is the thing that makes you into a more valuable person. Do I have a big house? Yeah. A lot of cars? Yeah. I grew up in Detroit. I like cars. All the things that Robin Leach thinks are important? Yep. Are they important? Nope. Do they mean anything? Nope. And you know what? If somebody comes along and takes them all away today, I really don't care. You know why? Because I can get them all right back almost immediately with what's up here, or at least I could before managed care. And you know, that's what Solomon meant when he said gold, silver, and rubies are nice, but to be treasured far above those things, knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. Why? Because with knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, you get all the gold and silver and rubies you want. More importantly, you come to understand that they don't mean anything. And that the most important thing is developing your God-given talents to the point where you become valuable to the people around you. The B is for books, which is the mechanism for obtaining that knowledge. You know, it's never too late. I got to tell you, my mother did eventually teach herself to read, got her GED, went on to college, became an interior decorator, and now has an honorary doctorate degree, so she's Dr. Carson now, too. So it's never too late. The second I is for in-depth learning, learning for the sake of knowledge and understanding as opposed to superficial learning. Superficial learners are people who cram before a test, sometimes do okay, and 3 weeks later know nothing. I'm sure there are no people like that here. We can and we must do better than that. We are talking about the legacy of our nation. And finally, the last letter, G, is for God. We live in a country where people are trying to exclude God. You know, summer before last, I got into a little bit of an argument because some of the lawyers were saying, you can't put up your Think Big banners in the high schools, not in public high schools, because the G stands for God. And the First Amendment says there can't be any state-sponsored religion. I reminded them that the First Amendment also says there can be no government suppression of religious expression. So we had a little argument. I suggested that perhaps we could resolve this at the level of the Supreme Court. Now, does that sound like a bold and reckless statement? Well, it really wasn't, because you see, I knew that the very next week I was going to the Supreme Court to receive the Jefferson Award. So I figured that I would ask while I was there, and I did. And Justice O'Connor said that they were way out of line, they were way over-interpreting the law, and of course you could put it there. You know, people are crazy who say you can't talk about God in public because it violates separation of church and state. Do they understand that the preamble to our Constitution, that our Bill of Rights talks about certain inalienable rights that our Creator, a.k.a. God, endowed us with? Do they realize that the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag says we are one nation under God? That most courtrooms and the land on the wall, it says, in God we trust. Every coin in our pocket, every bill in our wallet says, in God we trust. So if it's in our Constitution, it's in our pledge, it's in our courts, and it's on our money, but we can't talk about it, what in the world is that? In medicine, it's called schizophrenia, you know? And, you know, maybe that explains some of the things that are going on in our schizophrenic society today. We need to go forth from this place today armed with the knowledge that it's okay to live by godly principles of loving your fellow man, of caring about your neighbor, of developing your God-given talents to the utmost so that you become valuable to the people around you, of having values and principles, and standing for something. And if we do that, we truly will have one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much.
Dr. Carson, thank you so much for bringing us that inspiring message. Before adjourning, I'd like to offer special thanks to Professor Juanita Merchant, President Joseph White, and Rochelle Anderson, our American Sign Language Specialist, for their participation in this morning's event. We still have a full day of activities and programs, and I'd like to call your attention to the program booklet, and there are many of them available out front, and to the insert that lists all of those programs and activities, and encourage you to attend and participate in as many as you possibly can. And I want to thank the audience for your great participation this morning. Thank you very much.